Excited.
Good evening. It is now 5:30 PM and I would like to call the Personal and Finance Committee to order. Clerk Torado, I believe that you would like to make some comments before we begin this evening's meeting.
Good afternoon, members of the public. For audio quality, we will be muting everyone not speaking by default to maintain good audio quality for council and yourselves. If you would like to speak during the meeting, during the public portion, please submit your request in the chat. Directions to do so will be listed. We ask that you provide your full name and address, as those are required for all speaking at in-person council meetings. If you have any questions, please use the link provided in the Teams chat to submit them. Additionally, if you are called on to speak, please provide your details in the following format. My name is full name and I live at address. You will then be given 5 minutes to speak. Please ensure that you unmute yourself prior to giving your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind calling the roll for the committee, please?
Committee Chair Noskoski,
Present.
Councilmember Vice Chair Warner, I see you online, Councilmember Warner. Councilmember Lee,
Present.
Councilmember Thomas Morgan,
Present.
Councilmember White,
Present.
Citizen Member Angela Smith, Citizen Member Ross Steele, all present.
Thank you so much. So this evening, we will be hearing the budget presentation from Public Works. This will be the fourth of 11 meetings for the 2025 budget. The next meeting is Wednesday, September the 11th. And that will be a council working session and there will be no public input for that particular meeting. Additional information for the 2025 budget can be found on the city's Build the Budget website. Information about additional locations and dates for the upcoming budget meeting can be found here, as well as a survey that is open until September the 13th. The survey provides input from residents so that they can have a voice in priorities that they feel are important for the 2025 budget. The South Bend Common Council also has a website with information and links for the 2025 budget. Just for the record, that the council cannot increase the budget, fund programs, or create expense items for city projects, but we can decrease the budget. After the presentation is made this evening, I'm going to request that 2 questions may be asked by council members. If time permits, we may allow additional questions, but for the public and for council members, it'll be 2 questions each for now, please. Any questions that are not being able to answer at this meeting, Clerk Tirado will be recording those and making sure that those are placed on the website. I ask that you keep your questions germane to the presentation and maintain a decorum that is respectful to everyone. A maximum of 5 minutes is allotted for each questionnaire or council member. So Mr. Horvath, I see you're here. If you want to begin your presentation, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Nitzgott, and council members. Appreciate the opportunity to present the Public Works budget for 2025. I'll try to make my comments a little more brief this year. I'm not going to get into as much detail on the projects themselves, but I'm always willing to do that at a later date. If there are any particular projects that you want a more significant update on, I'm happy to provide that. But I'll keep the comments tonight specifically to the budgets and how that is reflected. I should say Eric Horvath, Public Works Director with office on 13th floor of this building to start with. And with me today, I also have a number of people from our Public Works staff, Jatin Kane, who is our Deputy Director, Kim Thompson, who is our Wastewater Utility Director, Dr. Boyles, who is our City Engineer, Michael Schmidt, our Public Works Attorney, who technically is out of the legal staff, but we consider him one of ours. And Matt Bussell, our Water Utility Director, Kara Grabowski-Brown, our Marketing Director, and Kelly Smith, our Solid Waste Director. And then in addition, special thanks to Kyle Willis and Terry Swift and Ron O'Connor for their help in putting these budgets together. Obviously, they're integral in making all these budgets work, and they do a lot of the work behind the scenes, making these things come together. So I wanted to give them a shout out when we start here. So I'll briefly go over kind of an overview of Public Works and what it is, and then talk a little bit about what we heard from the council members as their priorities. We tried to keep that to a high level based on the comments that we received back from the council. And then I'll go through the 5 main divisions in Public Works and go through the budgets of each of those divisions, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So here's the makeup of the Public Works organization. I just introduced you to most of the division managers. Sean Ward is out, but he's our Director of Streets, Sewers, Traffic, and Lighting as well, and could not be with us today. What you'll see is across the bottom, those are the divisions that we're going to go over and get into some detail on the expenses. Streets and Sewers is primarily funded by MVH and, well, it's gas and wheel tax, so LRS and MVH, and then also subsidized by edit dollars or LIT dollars. Engineering is primarily Fund 101, the general fund, but also has allocations back to various departments because they work on projects in the built environment for all different departments. On the water, wastewater, and solid waste, those all are enterprise funds. So those are the 3 rate funded entities. So all of those get their revenue from rates and are self-sufficient, stand on their own. So that kind of gives you an overview of a Public Works organization. Our mission is being the foundation for building a thriving city. That includes, providing essential household services. That's things like snow removal, street sweeping, keeping streets paved, making sure you have clean water, making sure we treat the wastewater before it goes back into the river. A lot of the basic things that people can take for granted, and we want them to take for granted, but are very important in them being able to thrive on a daily basis, because those things are essential and really the backbone of city infrastructure that allows people to thrive. And then, of course, developing sustainable assets and infrastructure, make sure we're looking at those things on a long-term basis and doing planning so that we're being good stewards of those assets. And then finally, enhancing the overall community of life. And so we're always looking at our projects through that lens. So this is a slide, and I know we didn't put everything in here that we had heard from council. What we tried to do is really take things we were hearing from most of the council members, and if they're more specific, we tried to make them more generic. But the first one is continued investment in repairing our failing streets. And I think you'll see that our budget will meet that requirement. That I know that Mayor Mueller had heard from the community as well as from the council members that investments in streets was something that was very important to him. And so he has created a streets plan that we've been implementing the last number of years, and really has put an unprecedented amount of funding into our streets infrastructure in the last number of years. So this is more funding than you've ever seen go into streets in the last 5 years in the really city of the history of the city. So you'll see that we do meet that requirement. More traffic calming and speed reduction. This is a tough one because we do have limited resources here, and these are a lot of times pulling from the same pots as other funding sources. So primarily when we are getting money for traffic calming, we're pulling it from the same money that goes to pave streets and do other activities in our streets, sewers, and traffic and lighting areas. And so you'll see that that has gone down a little bit, and I'll get into that. And we don't have ARP funds, but overall, we'll continue to move that forward. The existing traffic calming that's out there is working and will still be in place. We just won't be able to add at a level that we were able to add at in the previous years. But I will add that I do think the addition of PD doing a lot of speed enforcement has been a tremendous help as well. So our police department doing selective enforcement where we've had issues really is getting people to curb their behaviors. And obviously there's more to do there, but I do think that will continue as well. Increased funding for curbs and sidewalks. You'll see that we have met that, and I'll go over those levels. We've continued investing in curbs and sidewalks at the level of 2024, which was increased from 2023 levels. Investing in the modernization of water and wastewater systems, and you'll see that this budget does just that. We've got a continued investment in our water and sewer infrastructure, both from a replacement side that we've got ongoing depreciation and just, over time, things breaking down that need to be either maintained or replaced. But then also from a regulatory compliance side, making sure that the things we're doing are going to keep us in compliance either with our CSO consent decree or specific provisions in the Safe Drinking Water Act. And then finally, increased funding for street cleaning. And this one, we've left at a similar level, but you'll see we're doing things a little bit different. We are adding AVL to our street sweepers that you can actually monitor with a video where these guys are going, but we'll track every street that's swept, and we'll make sure that every street gets swept twice a year. One of the things that I'll mention, though, and sometimes we'll get complaints that a street wasn't swept when in fact it was. They're built for picking up dirt and other grime and small pieces of trash, but they won't pick up large pieces of trash. That's just not going to be possible with the street sweepers that we have. And the other issue that we have is parked cars. So it's only as good as it can get to the locations that are dirty, right? And so it can't go underneath a parked car. So if there's a clean curb and nobody's parked on it, then it's easier for them to get that nice and clean. But if they're going in and out of cars, then there's still going to be some issue there. In terms of some of that trash stuff, we will be trying to do some marketing next year on just making sure people understand the importance of bagging trash. It is in the ordinance. We're supposed to bag it before you put it in your container. And the reason is that not only does it blow when you have it setting out, and sometimes people don't have their lids fully closed like they're supposed to. But also when the arm picks the trash up to dump it, if it's loose, it will, if there's wind at all, it will blow. And so you see a lot of that in the neighborhoods. And so we'll try to do some of that, just marketing and send out some communications on that to try to make sure people understand the reasoning for that. So I think that's the list that we had as council priorities. Of course, if you guys have other specific priorities, I'm always happy to talk, but I think that's what we garnered from the list that we were sent. Moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about engineering budget first. What does our engineering group do? They're located at this building on the 13th floor. This is a group that does a lot of project management. So they're dealing with anything in the right of way, but also any thing in the built environment that is city related. So whether that's a fire station or a road or a water or sewer treatment plant or water or sewer distribution or collection system, storm drainage, parks projects, all of those are managed through our engineering division. At any given time, they have well over 200 projects that they're managing, which is a significant number of projects. And so we get into the budget here. So you can see this is our expenses for engineering for 2025. We're proposing 2.5 million in salaries. This is up 6% from last year, primarily driven by two things. One, a 3% increase in all salaries for each of the individuals in engineering, with one higher than standard increase and one new position, which I'll get into. On the fringe benefits side, you'll see that that went up 9%. You'll see that be a recurring theme that is in here, primarily driven by health insurance costs going up. The fringe benefits will be up in all the divisions. Other than that, you can see it was kept pretty tightly to 2% across the board. And including professional services really went up 2%. It looks like it went down $7 million, but that $7 million, if you recall, was the money that University of Notre Dame and Hotel Motel contributed to the Hill, South Bend Avenue, Notre Dame Avenue project, and it was put in there. So if you take that out, then it was a 2% increase in professional services as well. On repairs and maintenance, that stayed about the same, but I wanted to point out that there is $50,000 in there for alley maintenance is included. So it helps us continue our alley maintenance program. And then the $1,000 in capital is for the fuel site, which you'll see is being picked up by all different entities. They'll each pay their fair share. And then finally, interfund allocations went up 11%. And you'll see that hover around that number for all the divisions. Those are allocations to IT and admin and liability insurance and facility management, things like that. So I'm going to keep moving on. You're welcome to ask questions if you want, but I'll just keep going and we'll have time for questions at the end, but please interrupt me if you do have an urgent question. So to go into a little more specifics on some of the other programs that are managed through engineering, our paving program, doing the outsourced paving. You'll see here that we're proposing funding of $4.1 million from 251 Local Road and Street, our MVH restricted, our Local Road and Bridge fund. And then we have zero on major moves. Major moves was the fund that came from the lease of the toll road, and there's very little money coming into that anymore. Some of that money was loaned to TIF for some of the Addy Commons work. And so there's still some payback coming there, but there's just not much money in there. So nothing went into paving in that fund this year. In addition to this, you'll see that we have $933,000 in our streets department internal paving budget, and we'll be asking for an additional $4 million. There'll be TIF or other sources for a total of $9 million in paving in addition to what you have here. So the total paving budget for 2025 will be $9 million. Compared to last year, it was $8 million. Moving on to street lighting, another thing that has been important to our community and our council members as well. We'll continue the Light Up South Bend program, and we've increased that by 2%. We will use those for various city-owned lights, but also to get the infill program on its way. So we had gone through and looked at every area in town and mapped where we thought there needed to be lights. And some of these are easier that have poles. Others will need poles and wires taken to them. It'll be a little bit longer term. We're working with AEP on this, but that's where that money will go. And then in addition, the lamppost reimbursement program, which has been a popular program, we'll continue to do that program. Those cost shares will remain the same as they have in the last number of years. We'll have a $50 cost share for the targeted areas and a $250 cost share for all other areas of the city. Traffic calming, as I'd mentioned, I apologize, 400 plus 400 does not equal 1.3 million. It actually equals 800,000. So that was our mistake. That 1.3 was 2023 number because the traffic calming in 2023 was 900,000. And so the total in 23 was 1.3 million. We were able to subsidize that with ARP funds that year. But this year we're proposing $250,000 for traffic calming out of local road and street dollars, and 300 for traffic signal upgrades out of local road and street as well. Curb and sidewalk, as I mentioned, is funded at the 2024 level of 1.6 million. 2023 was $700,000 less, it was 900,000. So in terms of the allocations, we will keep council allocations similar to last year. So it'll be 2,000 feet of sidewalk, 1,000 feet of curb, or 2,500 feet of sidewalk if you do sidewalk only. I will urge the council to try to get your selections in. I know Gemma's emailing. And we did the GIS where you can go on and you can select the properties on GIS. It's pretty easy, intuitive. But as an alternate, if you want to just email Gemma, that's fine too. If you just email her a list of different properties, she'll be happy to just input those, and then they'll go out and make sure that they meet the criteria, and they'll try to do as much as they can, blocks of areas if there's a whole block needed. But we do want to continue to move that program forward, and we're jumping on this much earlier. I realize budget hasn't even been passed, but it'll allow us to get to a point where we have all the documents ready and we can bid this out a little earlier. We're hoping to get a little better prices by bidding it earlier, but also just have better management of it, because things like tree removal is always behind when we don't get out ahead of this. So if you could get those in the next couple of weeks, that would be great. And then finally, the curb and sidewalk reimbursement program, which has various levels of reimbursement depending on whether it's a business or residential or target area. And those are ones where it's a cost share program. And so an individual come in and they'll say, I want to redo my sidewalk. And then we will reimburse a certain percentage of that cost depending on whether they're a business or a resident or in a target area. So we've been doing that program for a number of years and we'll continue that. Okay, and on I mentioned the personnel changes. So you'll see that the top one is a new full-time equivalent, which would be for a project inspector. And the reason for this is it's much less expensive for us to do inspection with our own forces than to outsource it. And with the number of projects that we have going on, we would be spending a lot more money inspecting these jobs if we're going to be paying somebody to do it for us. And so we're proposing a new inspector role. Just to give you an example, we had one inspector this year that did Fire Station 8 inspection, but also was doing road and different paving inspection. Fire Station 8 alone would have cost $300,000 to inspect if we had done it outsourced. And so this will pay it for itself many times over. And then the next one's a title change for Director of CSO Project Management. We're trying to make that a little more generic, so it'll be more in line with what we expect his duties to be, and it could be other related projects outside of CSO management. And then we're using that same project title for our manager of public construction. And this is a higher than standard increase. This is an individual who is managing all of our parks projects, well over 30 different parks projects. So if you're familiar with, well, you guys know all the projects. So MLK sites, the Rackler Murphy, Four Winds Fields, Walker Park, splash pads, all of those projects this individual is managing. Really does an outstanding job, and feel like it's important to make sure we keep him as part of the team. Okay, moving on to streets and sewers. So these are the guys, so it says streets and sewers, but probably should say streets, sewers, and traffic and lighting. So we did put traffic and lighting down below there, because those are the three groups in this division. They're maintaining over 700 miles of sewer. They're cleaning that on a regular basis. 1,262 lane miles of streets that they maintain, sweep, plow, all that stuff. 160 signalized intersections, thousands of street signs, thousands of feet of striping. We have 3,000 city streetlights. In addition to the AP lights, we have 3,000 that we own, that we maintain. 400 miles of alley. All the leaf pickup program goes through this group. So that's what this group does. So there's a considerable amount of activity that they do that you guys are seeing every day. The budget primarily comes from gas and wheel tax. So MVH generates about $6.5 million of revenue a year, and we get an additional couple million from LRS. And you can see this budget is well in excess of that. This is subsidized to the tune of pretty close to $10 million through LIT, and it has been subsidized for a number of years. As Councilmember Warner had sent out an email maybe a week or so ago about road funding and the demands, I think every city's going through the same thing, that there's just not enough money to meet all of the demands of departments. And, you know, as I just mentioned, they go well beyond just paving streets, right? If that's all they did, it would be a lot easier, but managing signs and sweeping streets and snow plowing and all those additional activities they do that are important for the community is part of the reason that, you know, it needs to be subsidized. So you can see here in our budget, salaries and wages went up about 17%. There are a 9% increase on our Teamster salaries this year. We were a little bit behind on our collective bargaining salaries, and local municipalities in the area have been stealing our employees because they've managed to increase their salaries after COVID and some of the inflationary pressures that they've had on cities. And so we're getting around to that now to try to keep up with them. In addition, we are asking for 2 new positions that I'll talk a little more about, but it'd be 2 Teamsters positions. It'll be ops techs. And then the associated fringe benefits that you can see primarily driven by health insurance and the number of people. And then everything else was fairly flat, with the exception of repairs and maintenance going up about 8%. A lot of that is just repairs to equipment, and our cost at Central Services is more expensive than it has been in the past. Capital is down a little bit, interfund allocations up slightly. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the debt service interest and the debt service principal is up considerably, just because that's the lease program we do. And so that's based on capital and when that falls in. And so there are things that we're doing with both the fuel site storage and the salt dome and other equipment that are driving that costs up a little bit. So that'll be to cover the lease payments. All right. I'm going to keep moving on. Here's the internal paving. So I mentioned coming out of 266, which is our MVH restricted fund. So the MVH as a MVH fund, and which is 202 and MVH restricted, the state decided that they should restrict half of our MVH funds and make sure that it was only for paving and certain capital activities. And so there are specific things that we can use that on, a lot of things that we cannot use that on. So that's why you'll see that differentiation sometimes. And in fact, on the next one, signals and lights, you'll see that we fund part of that out of 202 and part of it out of 266. And that's because the restricted piece can't do any maintenance type activities. It's capital only. A lot of these things are just replacement stuff from knockdowns. You'll see lots of knockdowns, whether it's street lights or traffic lights from distracted driving. And it seems to be more and more of an issue for us. And then here's the position. So we've got the two new FTEs, which, as I mentioned, are OpTechs in traffic and lighting. And this is to try to help us keep up with all of the demands there. So these guys will do a lot of striping and sign stuff. And they're also the group that does all the special events. So they'll set up signs and stuff for detours, and will man special events. And so they've got quite a bit of work they do, and spend a lot of money on overtime as well. And so we're trying to reduce some of that. But overall, we'll be asking for two new positions there. And then in addition to that, reclassifying an operator 3 to a job leader. On our street sweeping side, we don't have a job leader. Most of our other divisions, we have a job leader. So we felt like it made sense to reclassify the operator 3 to a job leader. And so there's a 3% change on that. Talk a little bit about water now. So our water utility handles all of the pumping of the water from the ground, doing the treatment, 9 different points of entry. They pump over 5 billion gallons. They treat and pump over 5 billion gallons of water every year that has to meet Safe Drinking Water Act requirements 100% of the time. And they're also responsible for operating and maintaining over 600 miles of water main, as well as fire hydrants for fire protection. And so here's the layout of their budget. Overall, pretty flat, but you'll see a couple areas where we went down, up, and a couple areas where we went down. Salaries and wages, again, driven primarily by the 9% increase on Teamster salaries and the 3% increase on the other salaries. Other services and charges went up 11%. There are a couple things there that we added that we didn't have previously, that had to do with some risk management stuff that we need to do, and some other regulatory stuff with America's Water Infrastructure Act requirements, as well as our cybersecurity plan that we'll have to implement some things on. Pilot went down slightly. Professional services up mostly because those costs have gone up. Repairs and maintenance up 13%, again, repairs to equipment. And then interfund allocations up by 8%. And the interfund transfers out went down significantly. That primarily is driven, so that there are two things there. One is the debt service that we have, which is an ongoing obligation that we move from our 622 to our debt service sinking fund. And then in addition to that, we're moving 400,000 to capital fund, which is, no, I'm sorry, 620 is the operating fund, 622 is capital fund. The reason that we're not moving more, because we're going to end up bonding Edison for 7.6, and then the other capital needs there will just come out of cash, because we had cash in that capital fund, so it'll be covered through cash. So that was why that interfund transfers went down so much. So again, funding to improve cybersecurity. This is something that's becoming increasingly important to water and wastewater industry, as well as just in general, public municipalities. There are lots of people out there that are trying to get to your information, get to control your systems, and we're becoming more and more reliant on automation and system controls at our wastewater and water treatment plants. And so you become vulnerable to those attacks if you're not careful. So that's why we're adding funding for that, about 60,000 in addition, 25,000 for AWIA study for risk management stuff. And then again, some additional funding for communications going out about the water service line material program. So making sure we know where we've got lead service lines, where we've got galvanized lines and the such. There's one change in personnel in this division that we're requesting, which is a promotion. There's a distinct need, especially because of some of the compliance things that we have with the lead and copper rule, which is increasingly more difficult, as well as the PFAS rule, and then general compliance with our Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. That we felt like there's a specific need to have a director of water quality. This is a position that already exists in the city, but is not funded in the water utility. So we'd be eliminating the project manager role and moving, so we wouldn't have a project manager, and we would have one director of water quality and laboratory instead. Okay, talk about the wastewater utility, and then we'll do solid waste. So we operate a class 4 plant, which is a 48 million gallon a day plant. It can handle peak flows up to 77, and we're working on getting it to the point where it'll be able to handle 100 MGD peak, and we'll work on get that re-rated. That is part of our requirement of our consent decree. We also have a very large EQ tank being built out here. If you go by, you'll see new walls that have gone up already. It's a 3 million gallon storage tank that will allow us to take combined sewage, and rather than send it to the river, we'll capture it there, and then we'll send it back through the plant when it stops raining and we've got capacity in the plant, but also give us some operational flexibility that we don't currently have. In addition to treating all the wastewater and making sure it's coming back to the plant, they treat about 13 billion gallons of wastewater a year. They have 49 different lift stations throughout the system that are a couple $1 million lift stations. Or most of our sewers are flown by gravity, and then at some point you got to pump it up and then let it flow by gravity again. So here's the budget for wastewater utility. As you can see, salaries and wages. This is a combination of Teamsters at 9%, non-bargaining at 3%, and then 2 higher than standard increases, no new positions. Fringe benefits, 6%. Supplies went up 23%. This was pretty considerable. The vast majority of that is between about 3 different areas. Chemicals went up, our chemical costs, but also we've decided to do a number of these internal projects rather than do large capital projects at the plant. We're trying to keep up with some things, but it means that we have to have additional supplies. So, things like vacuum mixers or check valves, we'll buy those supplies out of this line, and then our crews will actually install it. And so we're trying to, even though that's going up, it'll prevent us from having to have additional costs on some of the large projects. Other services and charges went up 13%. I'll talk about that on the next slide. Pilot went down slightly. Professional services up again, primarily due to increased consulting costs. Repairs and maintenance went up 15%, which I'll also talk about next slide. Travel down a little bit. but adequate to what they need. Utilities have been pretty flat, so we haven't seen the big increases, the inflationary increases that we were seeing before. Bad debt staying about the same, and then interfund allocations are up 6%, and interfund transfers out are up 27%. The interfund transfers out from 14 to 18.8. 8.4 million of that transfer goes to support debt service. And then the other 10 million is going to support capital. So that'll go to our capital fund. So we'll move from 640 to 641. And the reason we're doing that rather than bonding is it's a lot of things like, well, I'll go over the capital pieces, but we just didn't feel like we had a big enough project to bond. It just didn't make sense to have those costs, and we've got cash available to cover this. So that's what we're going to do this year. And then we'll have some large tank projects that we'll have to continue to do as part of the consent decree, Randolph Sampson mainly, that will be bonding next year for 2026. So here's kind of the overview. So on the repairs and maintenance I mentioned, this is additional sensors and again increased reliance on automation, and we're building a digital twin of our plant so that we'll have a better understanding of how our plant works, and our operators will be able to play with the digital plant and understand what changes they make will have, what kind of actions it'll require, and it'll mimic our actual plant. And so, but we've got to add a number of sensors to make sure we're getting good data to do that. Lift station repairs, again, 49 lift stations. They're always, they're pumping every day, not 24 hours a day, but quite a bit of that time. So those things just break down, so ongoing repairs. And then, again, as I mentioned, the various treatment plant repairs that we'll be doing internal. On the services side, a couple of things that we'll have is NPDES permit renewal that we'll do. We do that every 5 years. Typically we get a 5-year permit, and so we'll be doing that again. Interceptor cleaning, which is the major line, that 96-inch that goes to the plant. We can't clean those lines with our city crews. They're just too big. And so when we do need to have interceptor cleaning, that has to be done by an outsourced company. General just CSO repairs on CSOs, making sure the gates are working correctly and that we don't have any overflows that we shouldn't have. And then risk management plan, on-site evaluation, which is a requirement that we have through the EPA, primarily because of having chlorine and sulfur dioxide on site. And in terms of capital, the CSO tank at Randolph and Sampson, even though we'll be bonding for that, we're going to use cash up front to get the project started. So all the design services, that's about $3.25 million that we'll be using for that. Sage Road lift station improvements will be another $2.5 million upgrading that lift station. CSO 35 outfall repairs, $500,000. We've got some hydraulic improvements at the wastewater plant, that's $1.1 million. And then designing the tech coat line upgrades. We've had a number of breaks on the force main that comes down the tech coat lines that we need to figure out what's going on there and get a design fix. That will not be any construction activity, but at least we'll have an idea what we need to do for 2026. Okay. And then in terms of personnel changes, this first one is changing our maintenance technician, which is a Teamsters position, and making an electrical and instrumentation manager. We're going to expect more of this position. We're going to make it a licensed electrician who also has some understanding of automation and controls. And we're going to propose that we would move that salary to $83,200. We just lost our electrician at the plant that was making the $57,000. He went to Elkhart and he's making $89,000 in a very similar role. So, again, we won't be able to hire anybody unless we increase that salary. And then again, on the director of SCADA and info systems, this is a person in charge of all of our SCADA, which is our supervisory control and data acquisition program, both on the water and sewer side, and all of our cybersecurity stuff to make sure that nobody can get in from the outside. And so we're requesting a 7% increase for that position as well. Okay, final one, solid waste. Whoops. Yeah, this is, well, you know, the crews that are out every day in the trucks picking up your trash and yard waste. They pick up over 60 million pounds of trash a year, which is just kind of unfathomable to me. And over 11 million pounds of yard waste a year. The one thing I'll say about this crew is that we had troubles in the past keeping staffed, and we had a really large turnover. And it feels like we've been staffed appropriately for a while now, and that for the most part, we're able to keep folks here. So it's a good success story. If you recall back a couple of years ago, we did increase their wages a little bit, even outside of the collective bargaining agreement process, to make sure that we could get people, because we just couldn't keep people. We were working them sometimes 6 hours or 6 days a week and up to 12-hour days. And it was just nonstop trash for the guys that we could keep on board. So now they're back to regular days, not having to do a lot of overtime, not doing a lot of Fridays. They do 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday, and managing it very well because we've been able to keep up with, you know, not having to hire new people. So you can see 7%, that's primarily because of the Teamster salaries going up 9%, increase on salaries, and corresponding increase in fringe benefits. Supplies stand at 3%, education training 2%. Other services and charges went up slightly, just trash disposal costs going up a little bit. And other inflationary increases, pretty flat on the other stuff. Travel is going up by a big percentage, not a lot of dollars, but that's because we're going to try to make sure we get our supervisors to attend the industry training that we have. So we haven't been sending them any kind of solid waste training. We think it's important to make sure we do that. And then bad debt went up considerably. That's what we write off when we don't get payments. It's something I need to dig into to see why that's going up here specifically. So that'll be something I get back to you on. But we are budgeting that $150,000 next year to make sure we've got that in there, just because that's what we're seeing in terms of what we're writing off right now. It's about $150,000 a year. And then interfund allocations, again, those are standard about, you know, typically you'll see that from 7 to 11%. And then interfund transfers out went up 21%. That was primarily driven because if you recall, we were a year and a half to 2 years to get trash trucks. So we moved up our purchase. So we had we continued to do our 5-year projection for equipment. And so we bought 2024 and 2025 trucks at the beginning of this year. So we could get those in. And so those lease payments will be higher next year. So that's why that went up additionally. So because we're advance funding those so we can get them in and have them for use. I think I already covered that. So I think that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. We appreciate it very much. I'm going to start with our council members here in the chamber that are on the committee and our citizen members. Council, go ahead, Mr. Ross Deal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation. As usual, so much information. It's like, what do I ask first? But can you tell me where you're at in your effort to reduce CSOs?
Sure. So the city had a plan that was $750 million plan that started doing a number of projects, a lot of separation projects, about 50% of our system is still combined. Spent about $150 million. And quite honestly, when I started, one of the things, and it really came as a joint venture between the council and the administration, we just thought the plan was too expensive. And even though we had a federal consent decree, we felt like we needed to sit back down, relook at that, and try to find a better way forward. Because we had implemented the smart sewer system, it gave us a lot of additional flexibility that we didn't have when they first were looking at their plan. Through many years and many meetings with public and council and EPA, we were able to renegotiate that consent decree to $275 million. And so we've got a $275 million 20-year plan that a lot of it is storage. There's some additional work we'll be doing on sewers. There's some plant work that we're doing. So some of that plant work is happening, and the $30 million that we're putting into this first EQ basin is happening. Our next project will be $40 to $50 million RTB at Randolph Sampson. But we're just at the beginning phases because we renegotiated that deal and started about 2 years ago in earnest on the new 20-year plan. That plan not only saved the citizens $500 million, but also was better for the environment. So at the end of the day, there's less sewage going to the river in that plan, which is why we got EPA to agree to change that. But we still have a long way to go, and to fund that $240 million remaining of the plan. We'll have to continue to have rate increases over time, and that will be a 20-year effort.
Thank you. And then the second question, can you tell me approximately what the number of CSOs that we had before the plan started implementation, and the number that we have currently?
Yeah, so we have the same physical number of CSOs. We haven't actually eliminated any areas where the combined sewer is overflowing to the river. But in terms of the amount of sewage that overflows, we've decreased it by 75 to 80%. We were in the range of 2 billion gallons a year that would overflow to the river on what they call a typical year. And typical year was they took 100 years of data and they tried to figure out what was most typical in terms of rainfall and used that year as the events that we would use to model against, which was, I think, 1992 or 3. If Kieran was here, he'd know. But we all know with climate change that typical year is no longer a typical year. So things have changed in that regard. But we do monitor the overflow. And even though the amount of rainfall has increased the last number of years, sometimes fairly significantly in a year, because we used to average somewhere around 38 inches a year, or sometimes up around 60 now. We've managed to continue to decrease the amount of sewage overflowing. So we're typically around 400 million gallons of overflow from the 2 billion gallons. So somewhere around 75, 80% decrease. Yep.
That's good news. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Harworth, and
You're welcome.
from some of the residents over in the first district. Thank you guys for thinking strategically how to answer some of our flooding issues that we've had. So thank you all. I had a lady cry because she's been waiting since 2019, and you guys figured it out and did it, and it looked good. So thank you very much.
It's good.
As we're talking about traffic calming, and the budget was 400,000, and we know that was we had money from the ARP that we were utilizing, and the new year's $250,000 budgeted. How much traffic calming can we do with $250,000? And is that just speed humps, or is it other devices?
Yeah. So the amount, the 250, let me just be clear, is specifically for us to try to do traffic calming, and that could be a number of things, but typically is doing speed humps. In addition to that, like as we redo streets and redesign streets, we're trying to be smarter about how we do it. And you can see that in a lot of areas. And we get some complaints that people, are mad because they used to be able to get somewhere in, 5 minutes, and now it takes them 6 minutes. And, Angela Boulevard's a good example. We've narrowed some things down. Notre Dame Avenue is a good example, LaSalle. And so we're trying to make things more walkable and bikeable, but we're also trying to slow people down so it's a lot safer. And so even though 250 is in that budget, there is a lot more dollars that will be going into traffic calming overall. Like we'll be doing Colfax, and we'll be doing something similar to some of the things that we did on LaSalle. But in general, the 250 will buy 2 streets per district. So that's 2 speed humps per district. So that gives you an idea of what it'll buy.
And my other question is, as I've been out, looking for the sidewalks that people may need, I'm finding that there's areas in South Bend that the streets haven't been paved for 30 years or so, or just talking to individuals or people who are calling the office. My question is how do we better address those areas? I know that, what Troy Warner sent us that great article about we need them like $1 billion of extra money in order to pave like we really want to do it. But how do we address those areas that have been neglected and bring them up to speed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we put together the streets plan, it was because we did have a lot of failing streets and a number of areas where we weren't getting to them. And at the time, we were also trying to leverage the dollars where we could in terms of streets that were most used or that had emergency vehicles on, things like that. So it further exacerbated the issue of these local streets that hadn't been paved for years that were in really bad shape. And so to dig out, we've increased that funding, but it doesn't happen overnight unless you fund it with $300 million. It's going to happen over time that you'll slightly see that condition rating getting better and better. We will redo the PCI rating again, which is, our indication of how bad a street's condition is. It's kind of like the PASER rating that we talked about before, but a little more robust. But it basically is looking at how streets fail and what condition they're in, and then giving them a grade just like any other grade. And so we know which ones are in failing shape, bad shape, poor shape, good shape, excellent shape. And so we use that to determine which streets we do. And so this is no longer a lot of subjective stuff that goes into it. It's pretty objective. There's we use primarily AI to determine street condition rating stuff, but people are looking over it and making sure that it makes sense. But when we put that plan together, if your street rates a 28 and Councilmember Nitskodsky's rates a 32, we're going to do your street before we do her street. And that's just how we do it. We just line them up by worst to best. And when we run out of money, that's where we draw the line. And then, we put things out to bid. If we get competitive bids, we may be able to do a little more. If we don't, we might have to do a little less. But for the most part, that's how we do it. So I think even though, I hear people when they're complaining their street hasn't been paved for 30 years, and sometimes that is actually absolutely true. They're not making that up. But residential streets will hold up much better typically. But there's just so many factors, the drainage issues, the soil conditions, how it was put down, how thick it was put down, that come into play on how those streets deteriorate over time. That's why we redo those ratings every year. But just because they haven't been done, like, you know, if their neighbor was done 20 years ago and they've waited 35 years, we may do the one with 20 years ahead of the 35 if it's in worse shape. And that's just, you know, what we've decided to do. And I get they want their street done, and it will get there, right? Eventually it will get there, but it's when it's going to be on that worst part of the list.
Councilmember Tomas Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Horvath, for your presentation. I think I'm going to piggyback on some questions that Councilman Lee asked and stick with streets. Just in general, I was just wondering if you could talk through where you think we are. What is the status of our rebuilding our streets plan? Like where would you say we are now, and what phase? I know our short-term plan was to be able to, our immediate priority was to repair all failed streets.
Yeah.
We haven't done that, or have we? And what percentage of failed streets do we have yet to repair? So generally, can you speak about the status of the plan?
Yeah, and I'll have to refresh my memory. I can report back on some of the conditions, but in general, you know, as you guys are well aware, every time you pave one street and bring it up to a new condition, another one's falling apart, right? So you're constantly battling that. But I think for the most part, the completely failed streets we've eliminated that were at the very bottom, and the stuff that we've been doing is in that 30-point range. And so, you know, as we go through this process, we hope that just keeps moving up, right? So that, you know, next year maybe we're doing streets that have 34 ratings, you know, and then move it up to 38. But over time, we hope to continue to see that happen. And the other thing that I should mention that we put a significant amount of effort into when we did the streets plan is the maintenance piece too. So we're crack sealing and doing microsurfacing of more streets than we've ever done. So we do about 60 miles a year of crack sealing as well. And what that does is, for not that much money, it gives us a lot more longevity for the streets. So rather than a street lasting 15 years, we can get it to last 27 years because we've maintained it over time. And so those, again, you'll see that benefit over a period of time, not over a couple of years, but over 10 years, you'll start seeing those numbers change. But we're constantly going to have an issue because as many streets, when you have 1,262 lane miles, you know, as we replace them, there are going to be streets that are breaking down. And, you know, it's just a continued battle, and there's not enough funding to fund them all. So.
I've been going back and forth with a few residents about the one of the portals that shows street paving past and present, and what has been kind of the status of that, what has been completed, what's in progress, what's scheduled and on hold. What it doesn't show here, and I thought was a good suggestion that they had, was to report the amount of miles we've paved. Is that somewhere on here? I'm just not seeing it. I know in the state of the city, we report on that at the beginning of the year, but.
Yeah. I don't know if that's something they can get online or not. I feel like, I know we can do it on GIS and we can get you those numbers easy enough. Because we can sort by the year that they're repaved, and then we'll know like the amount repaved each year. I would guess that they could do that online, but I don't know that for certain. So we'll have to look into that.
And with those mileage, I mean, if we were to measure something like that, that mileage would include paving and repair.
Yeah, we could do that. Yep.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Our citizen member Angela Smith has, and then I'll come to you, Ms. Ophelia.
Thank you for the information that you gave. It's always a lot that you guys have to take care of. One of the things you mentioned is some, I think you said repairs and evaluation of issues with the INTech coat line. Is the county and all the development that's going on out there helping? I mean, I want to commend the city in their efforts to not continue to run our pipes to all of these different developments, but also understand that there's pressure to continue to do so in some of these larger ones. How does that translate back to what the city does and how are those maintained?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say yes, it helps us both directly and indirectly, because they're paying, for the improvements, including, upgrading, lift stations and sewer lines that, are on its way to the plant. And so they're putting a significant amount of investment on upgrading city, sewers. In addition to that, then, of course, we'll be receiving, revenue from them, as they discharge, which, a portion of that rate is always based on OM&R, which is, the operation, maintenance, and replacement component of our rates that go into, continuing to redo, sewers. So they will have a big part of that. This INTech coat line issue, a lot of it has to do with, it's not super old. It has to do with, a lot of hydrogen sulfide in that line. And additional flow will actually help that, because what's happening is you're getting stagnant flow that then creates that H2S and is degrading the pipes. So one of the things we need to look at is how do we control that H2S, or do we use a different type of pipe material that won't be as susceptible to it? So those are types of things we'll look at. But I think in general, having those entities out there, should help us, in terms of being able to have the money to maintain those systems, but also because they are upgrading a lot of the lift stations and sewer lines out in that area.
Again, I commend the city. As a citizen, I commend you guys for the position you've taken on that. In the development world, we have people ask all the time, and I am always quick to defend the city's position because I think it's a good one. My other question, or is actually kind of a suggestion statement. The sidewalk repair replacement currently cannot be used in areas of the city where a property may not have an existing sidewalk to replace. And so I'd just like to encourage you guys to consider expanding there, allowing for a program that would also allow one of the older areas of the city, maybe where they never had a sidewalk, to use a similar match to fund installation of new sidewalks that were
Yeah,
there before.
no, that's a outstanding suggestion. And then, we say we don't allow it, and in certain cases we have, but, for the most part, just because there's so many failing sidewalks, they're in such bad shape, we've tried to limit it to redoing sidewalks where, that need to be rebuilt, but there definitely are areas of town that should have new sidewalks. There's no question. And some of that, over time will be dealt with projects. Like we did a specific project on Ironwood there, to add some sidewalks, that weren't there. Cause again, commercial area, crazy that there wasn't developed with any sidewalks on either side of a busy road like that. But no, I hear you on that.
Councilmember Gooden Rogers.
Yes, okay. Thanks, Eric. That was a good presentation.
Thank you.
And I don't know if you know, but I do know that the West Side has the worst streets. I mean, I'm just gonna tell you the truth. We have some really bad streets. So I would like to know, what would you do to really try to bring the streets up on the west end of town? They didn't just get bad overnight. They've been bad for a long time. And then I also would like to know, what materials do the contractors use? Because to do a street this year and then turn around 2 years and have to redo it, are the materials, what materials are really being? This is one of the curves and sidewalks, trees and sidewalks and streets in District 2 is one of my biggest complaints from the constituents. So I would like for you to tell us something that is going to happen over there, because it's really bad. We have a lot of bad streets over there.
Yeah. Those are good questions. So I'd say that the process that we have, as I explained it, is meant to take out any subjectivity between any district and not do more or less in any one district, but go where the needs are and look at an objective rating of street condition and tackle those as, you know, they're the worst streets and making sure we're doing it. If that means they're all in District 1 and 2 and none nowhere else, anywhere else, then that's what we would do. What happens is they actually, if you look at what we're doing, they are spread out quite a bit because we do actually have bad streets, you know, throughout the entire city. But I know that people, especially when you're traveling that area and you're seeing it on a daily basis, you're going to see more of those failed streets in your area because you're traveling all the time. But when we did the PASER ratings and the PCI ratings, we also we did numbers, parsed them by district as well. There were some differences in the districts on those ratings, but they were not huge. Like you wouldn't, was surprised that they were actually pretty consistent across the city in terms of ratings. So we will continue to do the worst ones. And if you've got the worst ones in your area, they will be done. In terms of materials, we have a spec that we use, you know, is an asphalt spec that should last. It's, you know, NDOT uses a similar spec. And, but asphalt streets, especially in our area with the freeze thaw conditions that we have, will last 15 to 20 years. They may last a little more in cases where, you know, you've got residential streets. Concrete streets will last quite a bit longer than that, 40 to 50 years typically. But we are moving to some concrete streets because it used to be a huge delta between the costs, and we're seeing some of that shrink. So that might be an opportunity in the future that we can get more longevity out of going to some concrete streets. Yeah, I think, you know, we'll continue to look at that. If there's a new material that comes out, they're starting to get smarter and smarter about how they do some of these things. And there's a lot of research on self-healing streets that, you know, they'll heal themselves because they're almost like a more rubbery surface. And, you know, over time, there probably will be improvements in that regard. But right now, we're kind of limited to what we have and what our asphalt plants can put out and our concrete plants. And that's typically somewhere between 15 and 25 years for asphalt and 40 to 50 years for concrete.
Councilmember White.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank you, Mr. Horvath, and your staff for the outstanding work that your department continues to do.
Thank
And
you.
would like to also recognize those employees that had to struggle with the weather and still were able to deliver outstanding services to our citizens. It has been
Thank you.
tough, and I do appreciate all the work that they've done. I would like to ask a question. About a year and a half, maybe two, we started the pilot alley. Is that still are we still doing that? And what has been the impact?
Yeah, so we are still doing that.
Okay.
And it's helped us make sure that we're keeping up with our grading program, that we'll now be monitoring that a little more carefully. And the other thing that hopefully you've seen is a lot of the brush that was overwhelming some of these alleys has been cut back significantly. That I feel like it's been a big success. I know that, again, that's, you know, it's a constant battle, right?
Mhm.
Because you're cutting it back and a year later it's growing. But we'll continue to do those activities. Long term, there may be other programs that we look at for alleys. I know we've looked at different possibilities of paving and things like that that would have to fall on property owners, the responsibility, but there might be some way to do Barrett Law or something else where they could pay for that improvement over time. But we haven't found any real good long-term changes other than just continuing to regrade alleys. So we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to look at the program. We'll continue the brush management program which I think is a big part of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Warner, do you have any questions? I don't see your hand up, but I just want to make sure. Is he on?
Councilmember Warner does have 2 questions in the chat.
Oh, he does. Thank you.
I'm happy to read them to you, Eric, if that's okay.
It's fine, yeah.
Do we know how many lane miles will be paved in 2024 and how many would be planned for 2025?
Yes, and off the top of my head, no. Do you recall? 35 this year and similar, probably 35 to 40 next year.
Okay. And he says, I do remember we have 1,200 total lane miles, and we have seen an increase in the citywide average pacer rating from the Rebuilding Our Streets 3-year plan.
Yeah, I think we were averaging 60, right around 60. Yeah, and that has increased, but it's pretty slight. I don't know that it's statistically relevant. It's like 62 or something. So it's pretty much the same as it was when we started 3-year plan. The good news is it hasn't gone backwards. So
Thank you.
welcome.
And I think that is everyone in the chamber as far as council members. Well, yes. The only real question I have had to do with the cybersecurity plan for water. And you said, was that due to the America's Water Infrastructure Act? And do we currently have one? And is there like a time limit? Are they saying you have to have a new updated plan, or what are kind of the specifics? I mean, probably everybody's been breached at some point with their personal information. It's the world that we're living in now. So how much of a priority do you kind of see that?
It is a very important priority that we'll update every year. And we'll do it again in 25. And based on, some of those things that we see, that's when we'll end up saying, okay, we're going to need additional capital for these specific activities, which is why the 60,000 is in there, because we did it last year. We found some vulnerabilities that we felt like needed to be taken care of, and that's why we're budgeting for those. So we'll continue to look at that. We did have a call and a scare, a couple of weeks ago, and ended up not being anything. But it's just something you got to continually maintain, and we try to keep a separation so that people can't get inside. A lot of these things aren't on the internet, so we don't have. It'd be cool to be able to control some of these systems from my phone or something, but that opens you up to a lot of vulnerabilities. So we keep those SCADA control systems to the areas that they're working, where our operators are. But it will continue to be a focus for us, and we'll have to continue to invest money in them. In particular, as we, there's nobody who's going to run a water wastewater plant that's going to get less sophisticated. They're only going to get more automated, more intelligent systems, more sensors and supervisory control systems. And with that, it just becomes increasingly important to make sure your cybersecurity is taken care of.
Okay, thank you. And just one clarification I wanted to ask about the 97, I think you said you had 97 lift stations.
49.
I'm sorry, 49. I was
Yep.
trying to remember off the top of my, and you said those are like $1 million per lift station. I know you had expenses
Yes.
in there for the maintenance on there, because that's pretty pricey.
Yeah, so they vary in size. So it depends on the size and what you need to do to any specific lift station. But in 25, we'll spend $2.5 million on Sage Road lift station alone. And so the improvements to that one will be $2.5 million. So it's anywhere like a brand new lift station. Well, actually, the one they're building out in the county is over 10 million, right? Yeah, the one they're building for the city that's out in the county is over 10 million brand new. So, yeah.
And thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for everyone for showing up tonight for the budget process. We
You're
will
welcome.
have one person that is online is, we're going to open up to the public hearing. Is there anyone in the chamber that would like to speak in favor or like to make any comments about the budget? You get 2 questions. I see no one in the chamber, and I see we do have one person virtually, which is Sue Kism. Sue Kism, you do have, you can ask 2 questions for the record, please, and your name and address. Thank you.
Sue Custom, 4022 Kennedy Drive in South Bend. Only 2 questions? Oh my gosh. I did, I'll, maybe if Eric is willing, I'll send those to him by email. I did want to put in a plug for the sidewalk on Springbrook near John Marshall School because I've asked for the 3rd or 4th year now. I wanted to know that for $9 million of paving, how many lane miles does that actually pave?
Yeah, so about 35 to 40 miles, about half of which will be by our internal crews. So we have a paving machine and we buy paving materials for about 1.6 million of that budget. And our crews are able to do somewhere around 22 miles a year with their own resources. So, and then another, 15 to 20 typically are outsourced.
I don't know how I am on my 5 minutes. I wanted to know, having to account for the new regulations on the forever chemicals. I know Tampa, Florida has put in a system. I wondered, are we looking at grants or what's the dollars that are coming with the mandate so that we can, I know you said you're like pulling from different wells to minimize it at this point, but I just wondered, that seems like a big budget item, and I wondered if there were like federal dollars to help us come online with that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know of any grants or federal dollars right now, with the exception of revolving fund dollars that are in a loan basis, but you can get a subsidized loan to do work. But what we're doing is we've been actively testing our wells, and we've got a study that does 2 things. One, it looks at immediately what we can do to minimize through just operations. So changing where we're pulling water from, those types of activities. We've got a couple plants that have a GAC, granular activated carbon already, that will pull the PFAS out, that we can run them through. So those types of activities, that's the first part of the study. Second part is then we've got a couple other major well fields that we will need to do improvements to pull the PFAS out. And we're trying to look at what the best technology is and what those costs are. At the same time, we're in lawsuits and working on a settlement agreement with a number of major manufacturers of PFAS chemicals. And we should have some significant dollars coming into the city that we'll set aside just for this issue. And our hope is that we pay for a large part of those improvements through those settlement claims. So we've got 3M, DuPont, and a number of other manufacturers of PFAS that we're in a class action suit with, a number of other municipalities. And we should be getting results on a couple of those yet this year even, so we should know how much funding we have available. Obviously, I didn't put anything in the budget. We're not ready for that yet, but as soon as we understand what those dollars are and we have the second part of that study ready to go, then obviously we'll be coming to the council with some additional activity on the water side for PFAS.
And this is a really quick question. I noticed you're spending $500,000 to pave Leaper Park Bridge, and I noticed it didn't go out for bid. It seemed kind of high, and I wonder why it wasn't bid out for a more competitive dollar amount.
Yeah, so we did bid that, and in fact, we bid it twice because we also felt like those costs were high. But we became convinced that that was the cost of getting that work done. That project is funded by TIF dollars, but we did go through a public bid process twice on that project. I hate the fact that infrastructure costs continue to get more and more expensive. I think lately what we've seen is we have had projects come in within budget. So those numbers you've seen the inflationary costs temper quite a bit, and in some cases go back a little ways. But we're still much higher than we were, 3 years ago for sure.
Well,
Okay,
I
thank you.
appreciate it. As you know, this is always my favorite budget. So thank you, Mr. Horvath. I like that.
You're
So
welcome.
thank you very much. And I'll send you some other questions by email if that's all right.
No problem.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Chisholm. And if there, yeah, I was just going to bring it back to the council and our citizen members, if they have any final statements before we adjourn.
Just to follow up on the brush cleaning and stuff with the alley, I think it would be helpful if the city could send out information and do some education on the fact that it is the responsibility of the adjacent homeowners. I know in a couple areas I've worked in, there's been some disputes about that because that hadn't historically needed to be done when we had our trash trucks going down there. And now I deal with a lot of neighbors who are yelling at each other about who's supposed to do that. And so if there could be some education about that, that might help keep that program, once it's cleared, maybe keep it intact. So maybe after they go through and clear an alley, maybe a mailing or a notification to that particular group of, hey, we did this for you and now it's your turn.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we can maybe jointly do that with neighborhood services too, because they're constantly out, sending letters to folks when this, in these situations as well, and threatening to clean them up if they don't get them cleaned up. And so it'd be good to remind people that this is their obligation. You may get some people that would do it on their own.
And then Ms. Goodenrajens had another question.
I'm sorry, but I would like to know, what is the procedure on knowing what streets have been swept and what streets have not been swept?
Yeah, so what we'll be able to do that I can't give you right now, because they have maps that they use that internally, and they go down the streets and they plan for every street twice a year. But I'll be able to tell you with certainty when we fully implement the AVL. So we're just doing a pilot project right now on one sweeper, because we'll track exactly where that sweeper goes, how fast it's going, when the sweeper's on. You can pretty much track everything. And so we'll be able to tell exactly when it went down a specific street, and how many times that year it went down. So we will have a much better visibility to that, a little more transparency on what's being swept, and make sure that all the streets are getting swept, in fact. So that'll be in place for next year. So you'll be able to see that next year. We can make that public so you can see it.
Any other statements? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to our citizen members.
Thank you.